dysfunctional that. I am beginning to build the brigantine Tempest. This is going to be a prop for Stickman. I'm starting off with a 46 to 48 inch log. I don't remember exactly how long it is. I've made my first cut there, and down on this end, although I'm not sure the pencil lines are going to show up, I've scribed out where I want to try to cut it. Now on the very bottom, down at the bottom, there appears to be rot, so I'm going to layer through that until I start striking solid wood. Now be advised, the bow and the stern both have a lot of area where it doesn't have, if you will, it's curved and it's made to allow water to flow. In sailing a long time ago, eons ago, people realized that the faster a ship moves, the more it rises up out of the water. So the hulls were designed so that the ships would rise up. When you look at the modern ships that have the bulbous bow on them, where it has the piece that sticks out in front, that technology was actually developed by the Japanese in the Second World War. The first ship to have it was the Shinano, which was a super carrier. It was the biggest aircraft, it was the largest aircraft carrier afloat until the building of the nuclear-powered aircraft carriers by the United States. It was 1,000-something feet long. I don't remember the exact dimensions. But the Japanese found that with that bulb on the front, ships could go faster with less resistance, although I don't understand everything that's involved with that. I haven't researched it. Now, moving on to the hull that I'm going to be building, there was a ship that was located, I believe, in West Guyana, Africa, around, I believe, 1956, which was built around 1870 to 1875, something like that. Some museum purchased the ship, found that it was seaworthy, the worms had not eaten the hull, and it could be towed. And what they found is that that hull was so efficient that even at sea, with the wind pressing against it, directly on the bow or the front of the ship, that ship would outrun and foul the towing vehicle's tow line. And so what they had to do was put a drogue on that brigantine hull and slow it down so that it wouldn't outrun the tow ship. I will see if I can find the reference to that, and I'll post it in a later video when I'm doing adventures of Stickman. Keep in mind that I have three characters. I have Miss Thrax, who's got degrees in geology and physics and mathematics. I've got Bunny, who was trying to get money to go to college when she got brought to Tree Planet. And then I have Marla, and Marla was a navigator on her dad's ship. She was also a telegraph operator for the railroad, and then she worked for both the Confederates and the Union during the Civil War. She worked for the Union after she was captured, having been a citizen of Georgia, the state, not the country. And so we're going to recreate her ship, and we're recreating it for Mr. Oakwood, who's going to want to have items brought in other than by dog sled. So this is the first cut of squaring this thing up, and I'll document as I go. Maybe a bit long. I may have to break it into 2 or 3 pieces for you. I just made my second cut, and something to be aware of. Right down here, you see this? If it will focus for me. Well, not enough light. There's my dog, and my wood is square to the dog. If you do not square your board, which in this case right down here, if it will focus, see that air gap? It's not square down there. It's mostly square here. That has to do with the fact that this dog right here on the outside caused it to warp a bit. Your log will never be square. if that happens, when you go to planing and joining your boards, you're going to have a little more work to do. In this case, I could have dropped this dog right here down more and kept that square, but since so much of this is going to be planed off, it's not a big deal. Now right here, I think you're going to be able to see my pencil line. In addition to that pencil line, right here is a lot of rot. That's where I'm going to plane down into that and see how far that rot goes. If it's not too very far, then what I'll have is I'll have more wood to work with for the bottom of the ship. Now the top is this piece right over here, and these are going to be the outside edges of the hull. You'll also notice that there's rotted wood here. Again, that's going to be removed, so that's not a big deal. So let's go on to step 2, or step 3. Alright, this is the top piece of the 3 pieces that you're about to see. The second one's going to be the one below it. Here you can clearly see the rot, and as I said, I didn't know how far in it went, so I wanted to layer it. Now as you can see, let me pull back a little bit. As you can see, it only comes in about 2 inches. Over here we have some rot. Got a little bit down here, which we're going to view in just a second. Now, when we come down here to this second board, you can see the rot here, and that's that last part I was just showing you. And you can see that it's starting to rot here, but it hadn't really gotten. But over here it's a little pithy. That means it's beginning to rot, but it's not really there. And if you look real carefully, you can see a termite walking. That termite could have been anywhere, doesn't matter, it's not important. Alright, here you have a much better look. You got a little bit of rot up here, which is okay. Got a little bit of rot up here at the top, which again, this is coming off. But the rest of the log is in fairly decent shape, and I can get a decent sized ship out of this. So let's get all of this stuff off, and we will move to cutting this other side. I'm going to mark this as the bottom so that I don't confuse what I'm doing later, because I'm getting ready to start V-cutting this, and I'll show you that as we get there. Alright, the hull has been cut into a square. Now this top piece that you see right here is 1/8 of an inch thick. And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because one of the selling points on the wood miser is how you can layer wood, you know, real thin like this over and over and over again. I build bat houses, bird houses. I even have a video on Tree Planet about cheap props where I built basically, you know, you call it a one-room cabin to burn down for Tombstone Hero. And I cut the thing even thinner than this to build it out of because I was trying not to waste board. But the point I want to get across is a wood miser, if it's a wood miser X 140 or a wood miser 260 or whatever, those last numbers, that's how many $1,000 the thing's going to cost you. And unless you're doing commercial woodwork, there's no reason to spend that kind of money when you can get a Woodland Mills, in this case an HM 126. They make other sizes as well. I do recommend the larger horsepower. Mine is a 9.5 Kohler Commander Pro. When you're cutting hardwood, it makes a real difference. When you're cutting pine, I don't know, because I've never cut with a lower power, but I have cut hickory, which is real hard using this thing, and the extra power made it manageable. So now what I'm getting ready to do is set this thing up to start cutting my chines, and it will be worked over by hand later with a sander, but I'm going to be removing the major parts of the wood now, and I'm going to show you how I do that. As you can see, this is the bottom of the ship. You have what's called a center line, and the center line is going to split right down through the center of the ship. The keel is going to be equal distance between the center line to the outside, then the frames would come up, and then the ship would be skinned over that with your hull. In this case, because this is the bottom, and a lot of this is going to be cut away rapidly. We want to flip this to where the top is on top down here. We're going to get the exact width of this. We're going to find the center line through that, and it's going to be slightly off center of that center of the tree right there. Now, something to be aware of. That area of the tree is prone to splitting. So as I fashion this ship, I'll probably be adding glues into that I know will penetrate into the fibers and help hold that together. Whenever you cut a tree, that center area, if I'm pointing it to it, I hope I am, that center area right there represents the first 7 years of a tree growth. And as far as carpentry is concerned, it is pretty worthless, as in it doesn't have any structural strength to it. When you buy wood for building ships, you specify no heart. It costs more money, but you don't get any of that right down there in the pith. For a sawyer, a shipbuilder, heartwood is a little different than for your average Joe Blow. The heartwood is specifically that center piece there. So I'm going to go to a white paper now, explain what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and draw this because I'm standing here. I'm going to set up a white paper. I'll show you that. Then we'll come back, we'll cut it, and I'll show you that. The bow of the ship is normally a high point, as is the stern, because you can have waves come from the stern and you don't want them washing over the deck per se. And you always tried to sail in such a way that you didn't have to worry about waves coming in laterally across the deck, although it did happen. Now, the main deck sits below the bow a considerable distance. The hull, in this case, you see these lines come down? This represents the curve. Now this is going to be up towards the very front of the ship. In fact, it'd actually even be more pronounced than this. That's fine. But what we want to cut off is this bottom line that comes down to the keel down here. So we're going to want to cut away all of this as much as possible using the saw. When we get ready to cut behind the bow down to the main deck, we'll be using a circular saw there, cutting to cut all that area out, and then we'll build all that back up with the cabins and the compartments down inside the ship and so forth. But each one of these lines represents the curvature of the bow till we reach the, you could think of midships. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this out, and we'll set this on the wood out there, and we'll figure out how much of this we can cut off by turning it, and we'll make both sides, and we'll mirror cut the that wood out there until we have the basic shape that we want. It will save a lot of time and effort in working. So let's go make that happen. Alright, my piece here is 7.5 inches wide right there. I mean 7 inches exactly. So 3.5 represents my center line on the top. Now I've got to get this center line all the way to the back, and I have to make sure that one edge or the other is completely straight, and I'll use a framing square to determine which side is the straightest, and then I'll trim a perfectly straight line in order to get this all the way to the back on the money. Now the big question is this piece level? I know that my supports are level because I just leveled them. In fact, I level them about once a month when I'm using the saw, or about every 3 months when I'm not using it, because I've got wood under here. The wood expands and contracts as it gets wet or swells or whatever. So I put this on here, and if you can see that bubble, it tells me I'm not level. I use this whenever I'm working carpentry or working with solar panels. The other way to do this is to set this right here. I use this when I'm working with solar panels or when I'm doing carpentry. So you got to know which tool you want to use. Now if we turn this thing, we're off by about a half a degree. So we can set this little jewel here, we can set this on top, and we can turn this until we are right on the zero. Or we can take this piece, this is not magnetic, this is aluminum, and I turn this until I have it right on the zero, and when I do, then I draw my line, and I get a real good line like this. The symbol for center line is a C with an L coming off of the bottom of it. That means that's your center line. So that's what I would put up here on this. And I haven't done that yet because it's not that important. Now we know that this hull is going to stream back. When we're using the saw, we're going to be cutting down the length of this thing. And what we're going to be after is we're going to be after what they call the wine glass, where it kind of comes down and it curves in. It comes down to the keel. Then of course the keel sticks down just a little bit. Let's talk about the keel. The keel of the ship is called the spine. That spine is what supports all this weight, and it makes the ship rigid. If you go to the west coast of Africa, they have what are called Cape rollers. And Cape rollers started sinking ships, and I forget the exact length. They were over 300 feet, but they were less than 600. What the Cape roller would do is a Cape roller has an oscillation of between 350 and I believe 400 to 450 feet. So it would pick the ship up, and the ship would be supported by the bow and the stern, or the front and the back, and it would snap the keel. The next wave that comes along, or the same wave as it comes along, would then snap the center keel completely in half. The ship would usually sink in a matter of seconds, and most of the crews died. Once they figured out what was happening off the west coast of Africa, they went into deeper water further off the coast, and they got away from the Cape rollers. And the reason they're called Cape rollers is because you're right there on the shore. It's nautical history if you want to go look it up. Look up Cape rollers, West Africa, and you can read about this stuff. The smaller ships under 300 feet were not affected by Cape rollers. They would see a wave coming along that was 150 feet high, no big deal, they just go over it. In this case, the brigantine was about 125 to 150 feet, some of them, not all of them. But the Tempest is somewhere in that range, and so when I'm cutting this thing into the hourglass shape, I'm not really worried about, what's the word I'm after? I'm not too worried about some of this being lost, but I don't want to be cutting off too much. So we're going to be making multiple passes and cutting this in layers as we get it down to the hourglass. Now, remember I said that there's a keel down here. In a sailboat, a keel keeps a wooden ship, it keeps a sailing ship from skidding laterally in the wind. In the case of these large ships, they were pushed horizontally because they didn't have deep keels like a sailboat has. And it's not the width of the deep keel like on a sailboat that keeps it from skidding. It's the depth, not the width. It's not how long it is, it's how deep it is that prevents it from sliding sideways. So in this case, we know that we have a keel, and the keel would be right down here somewhere. And so when we're cutting our pieces, we want to make sure that we don't cut into that. And our hourglass shape, our wine glass shape is going to be down kind of like this. And the reason for that is as the water is pressing against the hull here, it would try to roll the ship back up. Those pictures that you see of sailing ships where the deck is awash is very typical when they would be carrying all their canvas. And the sail plan on a real sailing ship is a lot more interesting than what you see in the movies, and we'll get into that. So now let's draw out our shape, and once we have our shape drawn, then we'll get the saw and start cutting it.